Welcome to my channel. I decided to make a video about my experience of coloring portraits in coloring books. I actually realized that portraits are one of my least favorite subjects to color. In the very bottom of my preference list, maybe the worst thing is some patterns or mandalas, and after that portraits. I actually love to color people, but I am much more interested when people are represented in some scene, when we have interesting background, beautiful hair, jewelry, interesting clothes, and when face is only a small part of the picture. And when I started to color for a long time, maybe for a year, I totally avoided to color portraits. First, I had coloring books where I didn't have many people, many portraits, and when I looked at them, I totally didn't know which pencils to use before I got Prismacolor and Polychromos pencils. I will show you my first try. It was in Myth and Magic. I started to color portrait. I think that it was one of Derwent color softs. I realized that I don't know which pencils to use for shading for the fair skin tone. If I start to add more pencils, my portraits looked like they were pinky pigs. So color of the skin was totally unsatisfying. So before I got my Prismacolor pencils and Polychromos pencils, I didn't attempt to color portraits at all. Then my first portrait I did in Magical Dawn. Honestly, I am not a big fan of Hannah Carson girls because of the tattoo, because of all those rings and other patterns on faces, but I told myself that if they are already ugly, I can't mess up too much with their portraits. When I just started to color, I even didn't mask those patterns. And my first more or less successful portrait, anyway, my first portrait at all, was this one. And yeah, I used Prismacolors. I tried somehow to use not only light peach or peach colors here, because again she looked like a pinky pig. I tried to shade a little bit with gray color, but it was a disaster, and her cheeks and her neck, they look gray. So here I realized that probably gray colors, even such like French grays, they are far from good for shading. I have many other portraits here which definitely look dirty. I knew in theory where I need to put shadows, like area around the nose, beneath the nose, on the cheeks, but when I started to apply those rules, all my girls, they looked dirty. And yeah, it was disappointing. So maybe I wasn't very disappointed because, as I said, I never actually enjoyed coloring portraits. I never wanted to learn how to color them. I simply have slightly different interests, so that's why I don't have those Korean books with portraits. And when I decide to color portrait, it's only when it has something interesting like accessories or interior around it. But from time to time I did color portraits. Some of them were better, some of them were worse, but at least in Hannah Carson I wasn't afraid to experiment. Here was my first attempt to do darker skin tone. She still looks quite terrible because I didn't like blending which I got here, and again after 2 or 3 layers pencils stopped to lay down very smooth and they created some stains on it. Probably it was another reason why I didn't like and why I still don't like to color portraits, because for portraits I think paper is very important. I don't want to print pictures on my own paper. It's too much trouble for me now. I have problems with printing at home and I don't want to go anywhere to print on good paper. It's just not anti-stress, not relaxing for me, too much trouble when I can color something. And unfortunately in coloring books, only books by Hanna Carlson and recent books which I got only during the last couple of years are finally printed on good paper. Many portraits books like Kolorowanka, for example, they are printed on such bad paper, or even Selena Fennec, that I don't know how to do complicated shading. So in the end I accepted for myself that if I color portraits on bad paper, I won't blame myself if I do very simplified shading. I know in theory that all my portraits, they look probably flat without interesting color accents, reflections on the skin. I use very basic set of pencils, but in many cases bad paper, when I started to do very complicated shading, it again created a very dark look and dirty look, and portrait was almost messed up. So now I accepted the theory that less sometimes is better when you color on bad paper. But of course it's great when portrait book is printed on good paper, which allows you to work with different brands of pencils, both soft and hard, and when it allows you to layer, because layering, and blending is very important when you color portraits. So what else I have in this book? I have this one. You can see that here I tried to add a little bit of lilac, light lavender colors for shading. I had several not very happy experiences when I added shadows on fair skin tone with brown pencils, like light amber. It also didn't look quite well. Only in the end, when I started to use beige sienna and sometimes beige sienna plus great lavender to lessen this pinkish undertone, my shadows start to look more or less acceptable. So that's another one of my first portraits. You can see again that shadows here and here, they simply look like dirt, and I accept it. Here it's more simplified without those gray shadows, but in the same time it looks flat because not enough shadows on the nose. I didn't know which colors to use. I wanted her to be with very fair skin, but very fair skin means that I didn't know which pencils to use when I wanted to do very light shading. So her nose doesn't have enough shadows, but at least her cheeks, they are not dirty. What else? This lady simply doesn't have enough shadows at all. I simply added a little bit of more yellowish color to show that she is among the fire, but of course again, shading on the nose, it's not enough. They are old works and probably 4 years, maybe 5 years ago. And at those time, I did experimented much more with portraits. Now I abandoned this idea, and only now when I realized how many books with portraits and printed this time on good paper I collected, so I realized that maybe it's time to give portraits the second chance, and maybe books like Queens of Poland, maybe they can help me to resolve this problem. Still, if I select subject of coloring portrait, probably will be the last one. But sometimes when you have not only portrait but also some interesting details, of course I am tempted to color them. But when I color them now, all my girls, they have exactly the same skin tone, because I selected for myself like 4 or 5 pencils which help me to color them, and I use them everywhere, so they don't have chance to have slightly different skin tone. And I know that there are a lot of videos, but again, each time I'm hesitant to follow those videos, because usually portraits where I do love shading, they are printed on much better paper than I have in books. So what else I have in Clara Markova in Hannah Carson book. Again, here you can see that I tried to mask those ugly dots which we have. Maybe I had to leave them, but I tried to mask them, and again it created such a dirt here. And also, of course, this problem is that pigment here, especially dark pigment, even in closed book, it slightly dirten the face, skin and face, and again she look like she never know how to use water. Well, that's problem for all girls in my books. Finally here, I did this one because I really loved her crown, but when I published this video I had so many negative comments that her nose started in the corners of her eyes, and I accepted it. But after this one I told myself, those portraits can go to hell. I don't want to color them. I can color something else and to enjoy them. Anyway, I remember that this part it was a total pleasure to color, and this one it was a huge struggle. Anyway, now when I look at them I laugh, of course, because it's steps of long story. Then gradually I started to collect other art supplies which helped me to mask the ugliest lines like I did here. Here it's acrylic paint in light flesh color, and problem is that for some time I used acrylic paint, but on top of it I wasn't able to use pencils. They simply didn't want to lay on paint. So my girls, they have normal skin and then a very bright line where I used acrylic, so it still didn't help me to blend them smoothly. Only then when I got another brand of acrylic paint which I was able to use beneath pencils, they started to look slightly better, and I was able to mask the ugliest dots, stains and tattoos which I totally disliked here. So this one, I think that she looks nice. I wanted this white, sickly white skin tone with only two accents on eyes and lips, so I deliberately didn't do another shading on her skin, so it was exactly like I imagined her. If you ask me what are my best portraits in Hannah Carson books, they are in Midnight Masquerade, and I have two of them. The first one is Marie Antoinette, but of course it was easy to color it because it actually has a very small area of skin, and what we have around it distracts attention from the folds which I had on shading on the skin. And the second one is this vampire girl, where again I told myself that vampires, they have very fair skin, so I don't need to do very complicated shading. Here I managed to mask both lines which outline her face and neck, and also those idiotic dots which we have around her eyes, which I totally dislike. So at least something I managed to do here. Very light skin, but her nose, of course, it's far from normal. Anyway, again here it was much more interesting for me to color her crown, and her face, it was like if you want to finish, of course you need to finish all of it. So the reason why I selected this page was because of her very beautiful crown. And here I also try to mask all lines on them. Hair, because I think that hair in Hannah Carson books, they also look not very realistic, so too many lines. So apart from having some skills in shading, you also need to have some good stash of art supplies which will help you to mask lines and to put some paint over lines, and then pencils to be able to blend. So that was my story with Hannah Carson portraits. Probably my only portraits where I was happy with my work, it was in Anastasia Koldereva, my only book. It's Mysteria. And here you know that portraits, they have a very delicate shading, and this paper, it's good for pencils. So here I mostly worked on skin with polychromos. I found that for me polychromos pencils, when I do fair skin tone, they have a lesser pinkish undertone, and my girls, they don't look like, I don't know, everything Barbie, or again like Pinky Pig. I absolutely don't like when fair skin tone have a very distinctive pink undertone, so I try to avoid it at any cost. So that's where I started to think where maybe coloring books with very light grayscale for portraits, maybe they could be actually helpful and more enjoyable for me to color. You know that I am not a fan of grayscale, and portraits are probably the only exclusion where I love delicate grayscale. So here I have these portraits. Here I didn't need to shade mostly, because shading was provided by, it was pre-printed. So that's why they don't look so bad. Here was my only attempt to do skin. With the set of alcohol markers, I think that it was Pro Markers special set for fair skin, but sorry again, it's here I used the lightest color and she's so pink that it's really not normal, like she's having sunburns. So I'm glad that I used it on the least favorite picture in the whole book, and yeah, I abandoned it after just a couple of layers. That was just one layer of the lightest available marker, and here I started to use the second one, but again it looked like she has terrible problems with her skin, so I decided that sorry, I don't want to color such thing, and to continue. Now when I have other set of markers, maybe I can try to do it, but I realized that for realistic portraits maybe markers it's not the best way. At least I don't know how to use them, and I simply think that maybe even if I decide to use markers for skin, it will be for more simplified portraits, more stylized in Asian style, or when we have not realistic girls but dolls. Anyway, also not my media for portraits. Here I think everything is okay, but again, mostly because shading was provided by Anastasia. Very delicate lines here. You can see that I never was quite adventurous to do Spanish skin tone, dark skin tone. Sometimes I try to add a little bit more of yellow and to add those adorable spots on the nose, on the cheeks, so skin look like with a little bit of more of orange undertone. So that was all which I risked for now. But this portrait I do love, and I think that here everything is okay. My other biggest problem is that you know that I film all my colorings, and I film on quite old digital camera, so it's far from great, it's really very old and very primitive, and such complicated things like all those delicate shadings and difference between light peach, light pink, deco pink, my camera, especially when I film during electric light in evening, my camera, it's not possible for her to catch all those colors. So even if I'm happy with the final look, I'm usually very disappointed with video quality, and it's another turn down for me why I don't color and why I don't film portraits, because I simply don't have technical ability to film them in normal quality, and it's really very disappointing, because you did normal portrait, but if filming is not bad, you can't repeat it, you don't have another copy of the same portrait. So at least here I love to color girls, but usually to color skin here it's so overwhelming that you can see that some of the portraits I even didn't finish. And I think that I hadn't touched this book for maybe 3 years, maybe even longer. Now I want to show you an example of my portraits on bed paper. Yes, here portraits, they are so tiny that you actually don't have to worry about complicated shading. But even on such small portraits, just one or two wrong pencil choices, wrong pencil movements can create such dirty look, which I got on Aladdin, where I wanted to make darker skin for this Arabian fairy tale. I wanted darker skin, not my usual light peach, and he looks dirty again on the cheeks. Instead of shadow from his hair, now he looks dirty. And second problem was here. I remember that it was a good thing that I started to do shading, then I almost deleted it with a razor, and that was when I told myself that on bed paper it's easier to stay with not enough shadows, but at least their faces, they will be clean. So here I usually use a little bit of beige sienna, a little bit of light peach, and that's all. Or sometimes I use pencils from polychromos. So you can see that all my faces here, they are almost flat. Sometimes I mostly give them blush, a little bit of shadow beneath the chin on the neck, and that's all, that's finished. Another similar problem I had when I tried to do more complicated shading in goddesses. You know that in Kolorowanka book paper is terrible. Here I tried to use pencils from Black Widow dark skin tone. They are interesting, but here they totally didn't want to layer, and instead of layering all those olive green, olive brown colors, they created dirt. When I tried to blend them with lighter shades, they simply didn't want to lay smooth. Pencil strokes were visible, so that was a disappointment. Another one was when I started to add shadow near her eyes. I realized that I start to damage paper so much that it looks like he have someone hit her in her eyes. So that's another example where I was able to apply only probably 2 layers, and after that I felt that paper didn't allow me and start to be damaged. And here she looked also quite flat. When I started to use a little bit of shading, also skin started to turn dirty, but I saved it by adding a little bit of terracotta, a little bit of sanguine here on her nose, so at least this area and her bright hair saved me from the total disaster with the skin here. After that I again abandoned the idea of doing very complicated shading, and yeah, on all my last pictures here girls have a very light shading. I started to add more gray lavender to mute very bright pink color, and I started to use a lot of cream and ivory to add shining, so it made my girls a little bit more magical in look. Also, I discovered for myself that I can save my portraits when I combine softer and harder pencils. So now I prefer to color mostly with polychromos pencils, and then when I put basic colors, shadows with nougat or bister, then basic color with cinnamon and light peach. After that I blend everything with very soft pencils, and my 2 favorite blenders are light sienna from Derwent Drawing and one of my available Caran d'Ache pencils. I have only 2 of them, and I use pink rose or titanium buff as a last layer to blend everything. Because of their extreme softness, creaminess, they help me to mask pencil strokes and to blend all colors, and they also work to lessen intensity of colors. If your blush is too bright or your shadows are too dark, then when I use those two blenders, they help to lessen intensity of the shadow, so you can correct your own mistakes. My next stage was when I tried to color grayscale portraits. Let me show you more or less successful grayscale portraits, and they were here. Here we have really good paper in Dream Dancers by Alena. So again, paper is really very important, and it was one of the better attempts to use that set of Black Widow sets for dark skin tone. Of course, she is not dark skin toned, but at least it's something different from my regular peach and pink colors. So this one I do love, and it was interesting to test that set of pencils, but unfortunately it's very demanding to paper quality, and on thin and soft paper I don't think that it's a good idea to use that Black Widows. And other good attempts in grayscale books I had here. It's by Evelyn van Kotsem. Let me show you. Of course, again, very simplified, very primitive, because I always select portraits where we have the smallest amount of face visible, but still here it was at least slightly better. So for now, if I need to color portraits, of course grayscale are my better preference. And again here, everywhere on these portraits I used that technique, first using polychromos pencils and then blending everything as a last step with derwent drawing light sienna. Very helpful. So if you, like me, is afraid to do those portraits, I can highly recommend to use this trick of combining softer and harder pencils. I also discovered that it's possible to color portraits in Creative Heaven books, at least when they are not huge. So here I did a couple of more or less successful attempts. Here I had this steampunk couple, and here the biggest challenge for me was how actually to shade man's face. For the girl I usually add bigger amount of pink, sometimes salmon pink on her cheeks, but what to do with the man, especially here on the area of the bird? Well, I decided that I will use gray here, and yeah, if it looks dirty, what can I say? That's what I can color now. I can't do better. And that's another one. Here fortunately face was much smaller, so I managed to do this very nice picture where I really wanted to do this part, and the rest, well, I had to color it, so I did it in a very simple way. Some other practice how to shade men's faces I had in Search of Light Bulb Burglar. Of course, here paper allows you to blend better. So here I discovered that I can shade using Caput Mortuum Violet plus Great Lavender from Prismacolor. So that's what I used here. And I also used here Wheat and Light Sienna, again from Derwent Drawing. So here and here and here on men's faces I added that violet, purple, grayish shading, and here it worked well, but mostly because paper allowed you to do first layer of fair skin tone, then doing this shading, then blending again. So yeah, again, paper is important. I have some other grayscale books, for example this one. Here grayscale was darker, and you can see that when I used my usual blend of softer and harder pencils, unfortunately here gray, it looked less helpful and it looked more like dirt again, and I didn't know how to work. For example, here on this shadow I'm not very happy. Shadow this on this cheek here, I think that shading is quite okay, but here maybe it's too dark and gray is a little bit too visible, so that's again made me a little bit nervous. So sometimes I really avoid coloring portraits, and I color them only if I am really interested in everything which you have around portrait, like this Dark Beauty series. I accepted for myself that here I won't spend a lot of time on complicated shading, but surprisingly on this paper I managed to do portraits which I absolutely love and like, maybe because I am more invested in the outer part and all those details, and again here my shading is very light, very delicate, various shades of cream, ivory, a little bit of beige sienna helped me to do this color. And another one I wanted to show, it's more adventurous experiment where I wanted to do the difference between normal, more alive, almost golden shining skin of the girl and part which started to die. So it's very dramatic picture, but honestly I had much more fun doing this unusual skin tone on the portrait with blue and violet shading rather than doing upper part. But I simply love this difference, so this portrait I think that I did in really interesting way, so I am proud of this one. And here in Dark Queens and King I have some portraits, but this side it's probably optimal for me. One had his side portrait is in such size that normal for me. When we have portrait for the full A4, sorry, that's not my piece of cake, and yeah, maybe it's a shame to say such thing, but I am even not very interested to learn properly how I need to put those shadows. Well, I allow myself to color subjects which are more interesting for me. And of course, here I enjoyed 99% of this picture, starting from background, all those amazing variations on the fabric, fur, metal, leather, and face. I did it in last 3 minutes, and I actually don't care how his face looked, because I love everything else. But surprisingly I love to color more I don't know, simplified or faces where have more a cartoonish style, like we have in Amandine Zhang, for example. Here I think that my more simplified way very well suits this style. Or surprisingly Jasmine Beckett Griffith. In the beginning I totally didn't know how to color her faces, but then I simply copied her way of just shading the sides of the face and area near the eyes and nose. So here I resolved this problem for myself for the whole life, and now that's all I do. A little bit of blush, a little bit of shading around eyes, nose, and forget about the rest of the shading. So here, and also paper here allows you to blend very smoothly without visible pencil strokes, so you don't have to worry about blending. So here I love to color portraits, but of course they are not realistic. I think that another one of my problems is that I'm very patient person in real life, but totally impatient in coloring. You know that I hate complicated layering. I color everything with just 2 layers. When I need to apply more, it's totally not my piece of cake. I start to lose patience. I want to switch already to the next project. So for those who prefer to apply transparent, delicate layers with harder pencils, just touching paper, maybe portraits are easier to do. Unfortunately, it's not my case, so that's another reason why portraits are not exactly my favorite subject to color. But I hope that somehow I will find the balance between my dislike to coloring portraits and doing beautiful pictures in my books, because at least 3 books which I have, they are printed on amazing paper like this Wildflower Folk by Christine Karen, and she's also printed on with this grayscale, which definitely will be helpful for such uh, person like myself who's not confident where to put those shadows. Another one is by Anna Marchinska, also great paper. And finally those poor queens. But yeah, it's a pity that I hadn't touched it, but at least I read the whole book from the first until the last story, so it helped me to learn many interesting stories from Polish history, so I consider it already a success. If I manage to color here something one day after 3 years of it, promising to do such thing, well, that will be a great day for me. I will mark it on my calendar. So that was my complicated story of complicated relationship with portraits, but I hope that step by step I will manage to improve my skills how to do it better. And of course I think that if you want to color portraits, you need to start from books with good paper, or to print them on good paper, because starting on very thin bad paper, it definitely can ruin your whole experience, and you will be afraid and traumatized like I was with my first portraits. Well, thank you for listening to my rambling, and I hope that you didn't found it very strange or boring, because yeah, I feel sometimes that it's strange that I have so many books with portraits and that it's my least favorite subject to color. I want sometimes to change it, especially because I have books like Goddesses, or I have Colorless Kingdom, and there I would love to be more adventurous with more unusual fairy tale skin tones for magical creatures, or to do dark skin tone, to do beautiful Asian girls. But yeah, I am not very adventurous, and that's the thing which I would love to change. Anyway, thank you, and after some time maybe I will do a review in 6 months, and I will tell you about my progress and what I managed to achieve if I continue to color portraits. Thank you.